Uncle Frank's Place. This is Casey McBride from the National Crime Syndicate.com, and with me tonight I have, as usual, my partner in crime, Mike Mafucci. How are you doing tonight, Mike?
Very good, Casey. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for taking the time to be here, as usual, and this is going to be our second official show, and for those of you who are new, and if you don't know what we do, we generally talk about the history of the American mob, and as that kind of relates to our favorite racketeer, Frank Costello. And a lot of people might think, are you going to get a whole show out of just talking about Frank Costello? Well, he's got a lot of connections, and he did a lot in his time in the American mob. So there's a lot to talk about. And if we're going to discuss Frank Costello sooner or later, Lucky Luciano is sure to come up. So we are very lucky tonight to be able to have probably the experts, the man to talk to on Lucky. We got Christian Cipollini with us here tonight. How are you doing, Christian?
Excellent, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing good. Appreciate you being here, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Yeah, Christian, you're actually one of you are the only person so far that I've interviewed that I've actually met before. And we met not too long ago back at the Mob Museum when you were doing a speaking engagement and you were talking about your murdering book. It was an excellent presentation. It was so much fun. It was great to meet you, too. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and what it's like to talk at the Mob Museum.
Well, thank you, first of all. Of all of the things I've done in the last few years, and just to put it in perspective, it's been a whirlwind. This is sort of my childhood dream. I just didn't know it would have to do with mob. I thought I'd be a writer because I sucked at everything else, and I was like, I got to make this work. And eventually, when I found my calling, everything started happening, the TV shows, the book signings. But that Mob Museum experience was still definitely one of the most profound, if not the most profound, because it was a year in the making to get that ready. It started as just a book signing and evolved into this is going to be a presentation on the history of Murder Incorporated. And it was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of fun. And I mean, it was so cool to meet everyone, yourself included. It was just, these people that I have talked to on Facebook or whatever, and I actually got them, a lot came to it. So I hold that appearance as probably the most profound of anything I've done yet.
Yeah, you had a great turnout. It was very cool. I know you were saying they really worked you while you were there. You did interviews. They taped you for an interview. You did a book signing again the next day, too. So you were a busy man during that. And I imagine it's got to be daunting. First of all, just speaking in public for a lot of people is difficult. But when you're at the Mob Museum, you're speaking to a group of people who are very into the subject, probably. So that's got to be daunting as well, because a lot of those people really know what they're talking about.
You really are on point with that. It's a really good point to bring up. I was the painfully shy kid growing up that just, I couldn't speak in front of two people, let alone a whole audience. But when you find your passion or your thing, it's natural. There isn't stage fright, except that Mob Museum, if I had maybe the jitters at all, since I've been doing this in the last few years, it was that presentation because of exactly what you just pointed out. All of a sudden, when I got to Vegas, I started thinking, oh yeah, these people are the audience, that they know this stuff. They're aficionados. They're very particular. And if they're there, they want to learn something they didn't know, and they don't want anything ridiculous or redundant, So I felt like I was adding more pressure on top of myself because of exactly what you were saying. So I'm honored you thought it came out well.
Oh, yeah, it was excellent. And I really enjoyed that book as well, the one that you were speaking about. And so while we're on the subject of that, tell us a little bit about your books. You've got a lot of stuff out there. You got, all your books, The Murder Inc., there's the one on Lucky, which I enjoyed quite a bit. You have the Chester Wheeler, is that his last name? The Detroit guy.
Chester Wheeler Campbell, yes.
And plus the comic book, and I've got your the one that you did on Lucky, which is kind of like the visual, the less of the writing and more of just the kind of the cool pictures and stuff like that. And you got ganglandlegends.com. So tell us a little bit about all these things that you're doing.
I'll tell you guys right off the bat, I blame it on ADHD. Okay, I can't sit still. My brain's always going. And when I kind of found my place in all this, I just didn't want to stop. I wanted to brand myself. I had certain missions I wanted to accomplish in what I was researching and finding. There were goals. And in order to carry it all out and avoid boredom, because I'm not good with boredom, I had my website made. I do book after book, and then the comic book series, which was an amazing thing that Seth Ferranti brought me into. I have a lot going on. 3 books, yes, and a comic book series, which will be an entire graphic novel within a couple months. So I'm pretty excited. Speaking of Seth, and I are putting the finishing touches on our epic little baby, as I call it, documentary film, which, you'll get details soon. We're still, it's obvious, there's been teaser stuff leaked out there on Instagram and Facebook that we've done, but it's going to be pretty incredible. So anyway, but go ahead. I know I ramble on.
No, that's good. Looking forward to all that stuff. So I love the idea of the comic book because I know, like, Mike and I will go back and forth talking about how annoying it is sometimes that there's not a movie really about, like, Frank Costello, or really a good movie that's ever been made about, like, Luciano or any of that stuff. And if somebody's not going to put it into a movie, which I understand because it's a very difficult process to do that, when you put it in a graphic novel, and if you do it right and you're getting the factual kind of history as much as we know, and you put that visual element to it, it's like having a mini movie that's actually doable for somebody like you. You don't need a $1 million budget, and you can tell that story in kind of that similar way. So was that your idea, or was that Seth's idea?
Wow. Again, you've really hit all the points. I'll tell you this. Growing up, I had comic books. I had some favorites, but I will be the first to admit I had no idea what the comic book world was really like. Even having attended maybe a couple Comic-Cons in my life, I had no idea. You talk about ignorance and being naive. What goes into that world, what the audience expects, what the artists, writers, colorists, letterers, everybody does. When Seth first proposed it to me, it was a couple years ago. It was an idea that, hey, I might bring a couple writers on board to adapt their books, fiction and nonfiction writers, into comic book form. That may be a good avenue. And I thought, oh, okay, that might be cool. I mean, I don't know much about it, but anyway, jump ahead. It comes to fruition. I decide what I was going to do. I wrote a book on Lucky Luciano. 1 million other people wrote books on Lucky Luciano. Believe me, I've read them all way before I did mine.
Yeah, but you've got the better one.
I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Thank you. Well, there's still even things I wish I could go back and change about it, but here's the point to that. When Seth and I were talking about it, and he's like, well, do whatever you want, and I thought about it for a while, and then I said, I want to do Lucky, and here's why. Because history never completely reveals all its secrets at one time. I don't care. You can ask any author that's researching. 10 minutes after you turn a manuscript in, you find some amazing piece of something that it's too late. So What I wanted to do is not recreate my book, but throw in things that maybe were missed or even mistaken. There were a couple things in my book that, though I was trying to fix historical mistakes, I even made some myself. So the problem arises. Of course, Seth is like, yeah, let's do it. If you know Seth at all, yeah, dude, do it. The problem was, A, I knew nothing about the process of turning anything into a comic book. And it was not a solo endeavor. Like writing and researching a book is a lot of times by yourself for years. Comic book, you've got a whole team. I had to go in and literally be schooled by the editor of Stash Comics on how to script it. What you're writing for multiple audiences. You're writing for the artist. You're writing for the editor. You're writing for the colorist, and you're writing for your reader. Then how do you take a gangster story and turn it into a 24-page comic book? So I had to figure out what segment of his life and how to condense it. Anyway, it was quite a learning experience. I know I'm rambling on, but I really was humbled and schooled. And then I taught them, at least this is what I was told, I taught them about true crime and how, unlike Hollywood's idea that you need to have creative license to jazz stuff up, true crime is stranger than fiction infinitely. We don't need to creative license anything because it's crazy shit. To put it in no uncertain terms, this shit is stranger than anything a Hollywood writer could come up with. So I explained that to them. If we're going to do this, I'm going to use real quotes. I'm going to use real situations and fill in the blanks so it kind of complements my book and vice versa, if that makes sense. But that was the idea. And I took a segment of Lucky's life because it was set to be 4 issues that would go in a graphic novel. I chose to bring it from the moment he gets scarred, the bullshit, if I can say that, over his nickname origins, and then take it through. I don't want to give much away, but let's just say the last issue is with him going away for the first time to prison. But it's really cool how I progressed through. But anyway, I'll let you do some talking now.
Oh no!
Well, how did you brought up the scar? How did he get the scar? Because there's a million stories about it.
Okay. Without giving away too much for those that haven't read my book, read my book, damn it. It's not you. Basically, I'll say this. History books and lore and even historians, and I'm not even criticizing, but naturally, if you take something that you think is legit, you keep kind of rehashing it. So you figure Luciano died in 1962. Ever since then, the same crap has been churned out, and it's not really to point the finger at anyone, but especially with the scars. And, he was lucky because he survived the ride. Essentially, that's not true, and the man had the nickname at about age 17, and there's proof. This is what I do. In fact, this is what I obsess over. I spend hours figuring it out. And it links to his tattoo. It links to comments he actually made later. And I'm not talking about made-up dialogue from the Last Testament. And yes, I will say it publicly, I loved the Last Testament of Lucky Luciano until I found out it was 60% bullshit. And now I make that the reason I exist, to prove everything that is true out there and I don't know, disgrace the garbage that came out of that book. He wasn't strung up by his thumbs and carved up and then called Lucky. Frank, and a lot of people, they throw Frank in there, yeah, that's what Frank said, or no, none of that happened. Those guys know he had the nickname when they were kids, but nobody listened because history likes repeating the same shit over and over again. I know I'm really sound crazy about this, but I am. It's relevant, though. The guy himself commented many times in the 1950s as to the nickname and what happened that fateful night. So let's just say he got his ass kicked really bad and was lucky a young cop happened to be cruising down the road and found him. But there's some interesting stuff he didn't reveal either about that night. But the scars, there is proof. I've written about it in the comic book and the book, and the tattoos and how it all links up. So does that kind of give you a good teaser? Does that make you want to? All right.
You're a pro at that now. I love that. So when is the next one coming out?
Okay. As of this moment, I have already proofed, given the thumbs up on the second issue of the comic book, which is, the first one was subtitled A Scar is Born. This one is titled Dope Men, and it picks up 1930-ish with flashbacks to the Arnold Rothstein thing. And what I wanted to do with it, I'm going to try not to get off on another tangent here. One of my biggest pet peeves is how so many books have been out, bestsellers, talking about Arnold Rothstein or Lucky Luciano or Lansky, Costello, all of them, and they simply skate over top the bigger issue. It's always about Rothstein and the gambling, or Lucky and he started the mafia. And here's the deal, gentlemen. Arnold Rothstein was the leader of the first official drug cartel in the Western Hemisphere, and every one of his minions that he mentored, which are all the guys we talk about, grew up to be famous for other reasons, but they were all involved. This second issue of the comic book is going to address that, and it's because I've spent the last 5 years studying this and basically consuming every piece of literature out there that has good stuff, and every piece of literature that, as I said, skips over everything and just wants to talk about the 1919 World Series that I personally don't believe Rothstein even fixed. I think he knew the fix was in, but I don't think he fixed it. So anyway, that's my rant, my soapbox, and what the second issue is. I'm so proud of it, guys. That's why I get so. The Dope Men issue is my favorite. Let's just say that.
So how long before you think it'll actually be out?
I can say this now. Seth texted me the other day, said the digital version has already been submitted to Amazon and Comixology.com, which is owned by Amazon. So digitally, it should be available. I think comic books release on Wednesdays. I briefly checked this morning and didn't see it listed yet, but if that's the case, I'm assuming within the next week or two.
Oh, wow.
Wednesdays around, Amazon and Comixology both drop new comic books online around 10 a.m. on Wednesdays. So next Wednesday, keep your eye peeled. You heard it here first, by the way. This is it.
Right.
Appointment radio.
I'm really excited. Yes. I am really, really excited for it, and I hope people love it, and I hope it changes history for the better, because we're still dealing with the drug problem, no matter what side you're on with the quote-unquote war on drugs. The fascinating thing is it's really, really, really the biggest base of it was Manhattan, and it was run by Rothstein, and all of our guys, as I call them, were involved. Every single one of them.
Wow.
All the way to Capone, all the way to the West Coast, to Parmigiani and those guys. It was international. And that's where, Casey, and Mike, I got to say, Frank makes his debut in this issue, and then much, much more.
Finally.
Third and fourth. Yes. Yes. So, there you go. I'm excited.
Well, I am too. Like I said, I think it's a fun format to put this in. I'm like, all of us that are into this, we read a lot of books, and sometimes I just don't have the time to sit down and read a gigantic book either. And it's nice to have something that's in like you say, it's in 4 parts. You kind of put it in quarters, and you get the arc of it, but you get some information in smaller bits, and there's a visual element to it, and it's fun. It makes it a little bit more entertaining. And if the facts are there, who cares how you get the facts, as long as they're the facts. I think it's an interesting way to do it. I hope more people probably will start doing this. It's a good idea.
I hope so too. On that note, I mean, to put it in that term, you're right. Plus, you hope from a writer's marketing standpoint that, hey, if somebody likes this comic book and they're getting, like you said, kind of this annotated version, but it's got the story, maybe it makes you want to go back and read some other books, and not even just mine, because you guys know there's some amazing books written on our gangsters. And I mean, take out the crappy ones, because there are some hyped up crappy ones, but and yeah, I'll say that because I call it like it is, but there are some really good ones. And I hope it makes people go back then and maybe read the bigger versions. And at the same time, you hope you hit an audience that otherwise wouldn't. Hey, somebody loves Avengers or whatever, and they're like, what the hell is this? Oh, let me see. This is different. And it's like superhero villains, superhero anti-heroes. I'm not sure what you call.
Yeah.
Suicide Squad.
Well, if you guys look back, too, in the 1950s, there were some really pulpy comics that I guess you could call true crime. They kind of made gangsters like these big-jawed idiots, and the cops were the gritty G-men. And I used to look through those, too, as a reference point, because I remember telling Seth, I said, here's something I'm not going to do. I told my editor and my artist this, too. I said, what we're not going to do is make any of these guys look like mindless idiots. And that's not because I'm trying to glamorize. It's because they weren't mindless idiots. Do you know what? Some of the cops were really fascinating, and some of the cops were mindless idiots of the time period. And that's not it's just like there is no good and evil. It's a gray area. I also wanted the comic book to show that. But yeah, there's also some artistic hype and, because I like this stuff. It's just I want people to get the facts. I'll say one more thing before we move on. Here's where creative license comes in, just so people know. We weren't there, and you guys know this. I know I'm preaching to the choir. If we weren't in a room with Frank Meyer and Lucky and Bugsy, we don't know exactly what the hell they said at a certain time. There were moments that, yes, I kind of took the comic book idea and was like, all right, I'll come up with some dialogue here because it's necessary that gets the point across or bridges some panels. But I tried to stay very true. And the beauty of what I do is that if you look deep and long enough, you can find somewhere where there are quotes from these guys. So I used real quotes and real factual information, I'd say 85% through each comic book. And then, little parts, like you say, they're having a drink and bullshit. And, yeah, I throw in, like, crap that they might say, in their own dialogue and dialect. But, other than that, I try to stay really true to it. I think that's what you're supposed to do with true crime. I don't know. Am I wrong?
No. I mean, like you said, you weren't there, so you don't know every single detail.
Right. We never will. I mean, you just won't, and you go by hearsay or whatever. But anyway, I'm really excited, as if you can't tell. So there you go.
I am too. I can't wait for it. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be really cool. But so I guess at this point, let's talk a little bit about your Murder Inc. book. That's another one that you've got out. Give us a little bit about a little spiel about Murder Inc. and what what your idea of that is.
I'm going to start with Frank Costello on this one. And Casey,
Excellent.
you know, because I brought this up at the Mob Museum. There are, of course, a lot of theories as to when the guys in quote-unquote Murder, Inc. were actually brought on board to the greater mob. I mean, they were underlings who had their own rackets going in Brooklyn, but when exactly did the upper guys say, hey, all right, make this official? And I don't know that it would have even been phrased that way, but of all the theories I heard, the one that really made sense to me in an odd way was that Frank Costello allegedly at a board meeting had said, we probably need some guys to do the dirty work, to police what we're doing, and kind of buffer us away from the dirty stuff. And some people would immediately argue, well, Frank Costello was the most he was the most diplomatic. He wouldn't come up with that. He didn't even like to, carry a gun or whatever. He was the least violent. It wouldn't be him. No, it makes the most sense in a weird way, because he was the most diplomatic and level-headed in some regards. He knew from being the guy that mingled with legit society and politicians to keep everything running smooth, who else would be better equipped to suggest, okay, we can't call the cops if something goes wrong within our own ranks. Why don't we have our own police force? And I'm paraphrasing what I think. And I just personally go with that theory. I think Murder, Inc. those guys were probably officially brought in. I used to think it was around 31, 32. I've read some other researchers, and I'm kind of believing it was more around 34, 35 that the mob officially used them, for lack of a better term. And you guys might, if that's clear enough for the listeners, it wasn't like they inaugurated them. It was they knew these guys were knocking people off all over Brooklyn because they were a sick little bunch, and they thought, well, they might be the greatest because they look up to us. And at some point, they told them, okay, we're going to send you all the contracts. And then they started doing it officially out of the candy shop in Brownsville.
Wow.
So somewhere around that period.
Now, was Anastasia over them or was Lepke over them? Because I've heard both.
Both of them. It was convoluted in a way. Lepke and Anastasia both obviously, and for those that don't know, those guys were part of the board of directors, if you will, of guys that were on the board of directors, Jewish and Italian gangsters, the big names. Both Lepke and Anastasia were familiar with these guys, and also Jacob Shapiro. Gura, his nickname, Shapiro, was Lepke's right-hand man, and I actually credit him with probably picking some of these guys by hand. So you had Jewish and Italian guys from Ocean Hill, Brownsville, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that were reliable killers. And I think how it went down, in case you may remember from my little diagram at the Mob Museum, my visual aids, what happened is say, just for example, Lucky Luciano wants somebody gone. He calls it into either Lepke or Anastasia, or tells them. Those guys then would go to, usually they would go to Abe Rellis, or they would go to Louis Capone, no relation to Al. And then those guys would pass it down to whomever they think would be best for the particular job. And for anyone that's familiar with Murder, Inc. at all, the ones at the core of the group, they considered murder an art and a science. It was almost a thrill thing. These guys teetered between sociopath and psychopath, whereas some guys were maybe loosely associated, and they'd be like, hey, you know that guy, so go whack him. And, it's like, okay, I got to go shoot this guy, and then they go home and have dinner. Whereas the 5 main guys at the core, they would turn it into a blood orgy. I don't know how else to put it. That ended up coming back to bite. I think, if I remember correctly, I think I said this during the presentation in Vegas, but if I didn't, anyway, what was Murder Inc.'s undoing was a lot of things, but the first and foremost is if you have a department dedicated to violence and enforcement, and you don't really have oversight that is reliable, and then you find out that these guys like to do extracurricular bad stuff, and I'm talking like really bad stuff. A couple of them were multiple times accused of rape and kidnapping, things that had nothing to do with the mob in and of itself. Eventually that's going to come back and become a nightmare for human resources, to say the least. And I do believe that was really their biggest undoing, is that these guys weren't that reliable.
Well, how do you
know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, how do you contain something like that? You know, if you're Frank Costello, you know, you're somebody who's not really prone to the violence yourself. You know, like you're saying, what are you going to do to contain a department like that that's in your business? You know, their very nature is they're uncontainable. It's crazy. Yeah, I always thought it was funny too. You know, because Frank has the reputation of not carrying a gun. But, you know, he had Murder Inc., so in essence, that was his gun. You don't need to carry a gun when you have that, you know, at your disposal.
I think but that's a really good point, because I think that is part of why I personally lean towards that theory we talked about earlier. Frank kind of saw things in such a way. You know who actually, I got to give credit to. You guys might know Ronnie Fino. He was the one that really first mentioned that theory to me, and it makes sense, because Costello would know. Yeah,
and he was very organized that way. You know, he was that's what he did. He compartmentalized things, and he did put things in kind of, you know, he ran things like a business, and that's what you would have. You would have. This is the department of our business. Man. Yeah, exactly.
No, absolutely. And you said you can't contain him. You're right. And again, I may be reaching further or being presumptuous, but I don't know that guys like Frank and Lucky and Meyer, I don't know that they even were that aware of the specifics like that. Pittsburgh Phil and Happy Mayone, you know, with the ice picks and stuff. I mean, I'm sure they knew, but not knew. Lepke and Anastasia really hired literally borderline serial killers. I don't think that those guys would have been aware as Anastasia, but he was kind of, you know, and Lepke, I don't know how much Lepke even knew, because a lot of this was left to Jacob Shapiro. And who knows? Like, none of us were there. I just think what you said, though, is correct. If you're going to have some vicious bastards do your dirty work, you better be prepared for some backlash, because you're dealing with vicious bastards.
the worst of the worst, yeah.
Yes. There's two sides to that coin. But anyway, yeah, so that's I kind of buy into that theory that Frank at least would have had a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, very interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about like your take on what do you think Costello and Lucky's relationship was in the mob? I mean, because it's, you know, they're two of the top guys in the history of this, and one of the things that I always liked about the relationship is they never seem to turn on each other, which is pretty unusual in this world that we're talking about. They, you know, there's between Lansky, Lucky, and Costello, for the most part, they seem to kind of stick together through that whole run that they had, which was huge. It was long, and they were on the top in the middle of all the craziness. I don't know how they did it, but what's your take on that whole thing?
I try to play these scenarios out in my head. all the time. That's a really good question. It's a subject that's it's almost hard to process because in the simplest terms, we're looking at a time period that I'll say this first. There never was before and there never will be again that heyday of the mob. When people throw that the cliche phrase, there's no honor among thieves, that's very true, but I will say this. During that time period, there was some honor among thieves. Even in the dishonor, like, not to get off on something, but, I mean, to kill Masseria and Maranzano, obviously, they were very deceitful. But the bigger picture, how the hell do you get hundreds of guys across the nation all on board with their mouths closed in 1931 and killed the two major New York mob bosses? How do you do that? Those guys did it. Those guys had, dare I say, loyalty and friendship of that whole generation. From New York to Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland. These guys were all on board and waiting for the phone calls, especially after the Maranzano hit. Everyone was on board. You would never see that in an organized crime group again. Where, I mean, granted, you're talking about a different time period. You're talking about a different mentality, a different social stratosphere. But that's what makes it so neat. It's almost fairy tale-like, almost like fiction. I mean,
couldn't actually happen that way.
Yeah, like you would think Hollywood would have to make that up. They didn't. It really happened that way. Those guys, Costello, Lansky, Siegel, Capone, everybody was on board. They changed the course of the American underworld in 1 year. And it just, there was, I don't ever see that happening again. In their heyday, like Casey was alluding to, I mean, really lasted. These guys stayed friends. And even when they had to kill some other friends off later or it had to happen, there was still an air of loyalty even in their voices when they would admit stuff. It was, I don't know, I guess you'll just, you'll never see that again, I don't think. Or we've never seen it again.
Yeah, I agree. If that's what you say, though, like it's, I stopped reading. I was a big fan of fiction all through my teenage years and things like that. And then once I started getting into this, I was like, I don't need to really read fiction. I don't need to read it anymore to be entertained. And plus, I'm actually learning something that really happened. So there's an added bonus to it that I'm getting an education on history and still being entertained just by things that really happened by these people. And people ask you, why are you interested in this? Well, this is why. Because it's fascinating. The stories are incredible.
It is. I agree with you. I mean, I grew up reading all kinds of things, fiction, nonfiction. The nonfiction kind of hooked me personally. I didn't even know that's what I would write. I actually thought I'd be a fiction writer someday, and I found out if you try to force a fictional book or story, a reader's going to know that real quick. So
I'll spot that.
Yeah. And that's, we all would. You can pick that out. When somebody's forcing. And I found my niche was nonfiction. I had, the talent for the research. But also, to your point, it is entertaining. You are learning something, and it still gets to take you away. If it's the right stuff or whatever,
right,
like this mob stuff, it's still almost like you're going into a fictional world because, assuming we're all law-abiding upper world denizens or are good people, we can live vicariously through it.
Right.
It's kind of fun to think, man, Jacklegs Diamond, dude got shot all these times and still lived, and that's crazy. That's cool. I wish I could do that. Not for real, and then you find out, oh, wait a second, that wasn't even made up. That dude was shot a bunch of times and survived. I mean, my luck, once and you're done. It's got all of those aspects that you guys mentioned. I think is why we love it. I don't know.
That's why we're talking about it right now, for sure. Hey, so we have a little bit of time left here, and I want to make sure that we touch on this. You're quite a collector of this memorabilia and pictures and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that got started, and you know, what's your take on the collecting side of this whole genre?
There's a whole world that I didn't even know about with the collecting of mob and crime stuff. There's people who collect serial killer stuff. There's people who collect artifacts from Alcatraz. There are people who collect photographs and crime scene photos, mugshots. I just real quick, I got to give credit to Arthur Nash. It was his book, New York City Gangland, that really got me thinking about the photos. And in fact, writing the Chester book started with an $8 photograph I bought at an auction. That's what it was, a photograph of a mean-looking dude, and I bought it, and I realized it was a press photo. And on the back, it had little notes. One thing led to another. I spent a year researching based on because the photo was just so cool. So now, yeah, my collection. Everybody has their things they really like. I am a visual guy. I love the original press and police photos. I know this sounds macabre, but I really get excited if I land a rare crime scene photo from, say, the 20s or 30s. And I don't mean sound in a weird, creepy way. It's just, and mug shots. I'm getting more into that, and a couple other names out there. Avi Bash is another friend of mine, colleague.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, Avi and his mugshot collection. I'm so envious. It's awesome. We show each other stuff when we find it. But he and Arthur Nash and a few other people, I've gained quite a collection. Of course, my favorites are the Murder Inc. and the Lucky Lucianos. But I also, obviously, with this Dope Men thing, the obsession with Rothstein-related photos, and I don't mean just him. I mean, as you're going to meet in the comic book, I'll plug that again. You're going to meet some characters that are lesser known, but were they so important to the greater scheme. I love it when I get photos or mugshots of the guys that were involved in all this, but yet even a lot of aficionados don't even know who they are. It gets me. But yeah, I probably have, I haven't even counted. I don't know, several hundred photos.
Wow.
Wanted circulars, mugshots, press photos, wire photos, police photos. I even have some original slides and negatives from the period, like from photographer Ouija. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He was at like every crime scene before the cops were with a camera. I have a couple original Ouija items. So I'm pretty excited. I don't have many like shanks or bullets or anything like that. Some of like Arthur and Avi and guys like that have some really cool physical stuff. But I'm a photo guy. That's my thing. Right.
Well, those are great though too, because if you're a writer and then you've got a collection of photos that are yours that you don't have to go get permission for and pay a bunch of money to put in your book and stuff like that. When you buy those press photos and stuff, like once you purchased them, they're yours, right? Like you don't have to go to anybody to get permission to use that anymore. Like now,
you know what? The laws in this country are so convoluted, and companies, and I'm not going to name names, but there's a few big companies that claim they manage the rights for certain photos, and then I look in my collection, I'm like, dude, I have the same photo, and it's original too. I'm A, not going to pay you, and B, there isn't shit you're going to do to me about it, because I'll get my lawyers too. But when it comes down to it, everybody gets scared. They're like, can I use this? I'm like, okay, here's the reality. First of all, you're talking about photos from almost 100 friggin' years ago. These people are dead. The photographers are dead, and the wire services don't exist. But yet someone wants to make a couple $1,000s each time a photo's used. I think it's a ripoff and a racket.
Yeah.
And I will use, here's what I'm saying this publicly. I will use whatever the hell photo I want, wherever I want, if I have it in my collection. That's how it rolls. because the public needs to see it. It's history, and I'm not paying somebody money. I acquired these. They're originals. So there's my other soapbox. You guys think I'm nuts yet?
No, I love it. You know, as a musician, I like to say, like, when's the last time you paid a royalty to Mozart? You know, all that stuff's free. If you want to use that kind of music in your video or something, there's no copyrights really over it anymore. And it's some of the greatest music ever written. But somebody could, you know, go on their computer and tap out a couple beats, and they're like, oh, I have the copyright on this, and now I own this. And it's so, like you're saying, these people who took these pictures are gone long, long ago.
You bring up a good point, though, Casey. And as a musician, you know, here's the thing. As a writer, I don't want anybody ripping me off or taking my photo or doing all that stuff because I work for this. That's like if I hire a plumber, I'm not going to have him dig a ditch in my yard and then he comes in and say, hey, dude, that's your advertising. You dug a ditch. He's like, no, pay me. That's how it is for us, and people need to understand, going back to even the MP3 thing. Look, I don't mind somebody using stuff and learning from it. That's what it's there for. But that's modern, and pay us for our talents. It's not free. We have to pay bills too. But at the same time, I think it's so wrong that these corporations can manage rights and own shit from people that, like you said, somebody's been dead for 100 years, and you're going to tell me I can't use this photo when I own the exact same copy of photo.
Sure.
From the same, I'm not that I'll fight, but this I will fight for. I don't want anybody ripping your music off. I don't want anybody ripping my book excerpts off. Yeah, I give them away and sometimes, but no, don't plagiarize me. Don't steal it to make money for yourself. You know, if you ask me permission, I might even be nice, but don't steal it. I don't steal. I pay for all this shit. It's just I think people get ripped off by corporate America. You know what? Now I sound like I'm glamorizing gangsters because I hate corporate America.
Well, we've
you know what?
Full circle.
I'll still sleep like a baby tonight, guys. I have no shame.
My philosophy is I'd rather beg forgiveness than ask permission, I guess, on some of these photos.
Can I borrow that, Casey? Can I borrow that phrase? I will give you credit, though. I promise.
Yes, I want credit, and I want a royalty every time you use it, actually.
Damn it, I knew it. I'll cut you a check tomorrow.
Well, gentlemen, we are just about out of time, but wow, that was, you know, I could have kept talking for another hour there for sure.
It was fun.
I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this and have this conversation, and I feel like we probably still have some stuff to talk about, so we'll probably have to do something else here in the future. But before we go, Christian, plug your website for us once. I don't think we've talked really given that website out.
It's ganglandlegends.com. And I'm all over social media. My handle is Gangland Legend, all one word. So I try to make it streamlined. Gangland Legend, me. You can see what comic books are out there, what we've got coming out, and like I said, with the documentary coming. And I gotta say, I've got a super special thing coming up this summer with my good friend Tara Patrick. So if any of your fans know who she is, you can be guaranteed this is going to be super cool. So,
nice.
There. Yeah. Another show, we'll talk.
I was going to say, you'll have to come back and we'll talk about it. You know, when the time comes and we get a little bit closer, we'll put it back out there again. But once again, really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I love everything you do. I've been a big fan of all your stuff. So getting the chance to actually have this conversation, we should have done it when we were in Vegas, but at least we got Mike in on the conversation, so it's better now anyway. So.
No, I appreciate both you guys. Thank you so much for having me on. I hope you guys had a good time.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
No, anytime, guys. I'm honored.
Okay, you got it, man. Careful what you wish for.